Welcome, good morning, good evening, according to the specific timing or time zone you're in. Welcome to you all, to our participants, to our speakers. As you know, we are meeting following the issue of the World Bank report about improving the Arabic language and to address Arabic language poverty in the Middle East and North Africa. This is the fourth session in 4 meetings, and in cooperation with the Queen Rania organization in Jordan to discuss all issues that the report has raised, but in more depth every time we handled a specific topic to talk about the challenges that the different countries are facing in the region. So we will be also talking about the opportunities available to monitor the development of children. And this is the most important title today, is indeed to monitor the development of skills in reading and writing in early classes, specifically so that we can develop these skills in primary education and to use the various assessment methodologies to understand the needs of these children. We welcome our speakers. So, Dr. Sana Tibi, Professor of Communication at the University of Florida, will be also joined and will be by Professor Ata Jibril from Applied Linguistics, who prepares English language teachers at the AU in Cairo. We are also joined by Dr. Jane Courtney, specialist, an education specialist, will be also addressing several questions from the participants. And we will also be posting all the web pages available. I would like to give Mr. Bloom the chance to speak to us about a number of issues about international and national assessments of reading and writing skills in the Middle East and North Africa. Mr. Bloom, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Amal. Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen and then also say good afternoon to all the participants and thank them for joining this webinar. I hope you will find it worthwhile your time. I'll be presenting about learning assessment in the Middle East and North Africa with a particular emphasis on assessing Arabic literacy. Before going into the topic, I would also like to thank the Queen Rania Foundation, our partner in this series of webinars on learning poverty, a critical topic for the World Bank. We know that if we can improve education and have all children learn, in particularly learn Arabic literacy, reading and writing, they will stand a much better chance for a life out of poverty and being productive and having economic growth in the countries in the Middle East and North Africa. So education is absolutely fundamental. And one of the most important things of the education system is to make sure that children are learning. And that's what that's what learning assessments are measuring. I have 13 slides and around 15 minutes. So I'll go a little bit fast. I hope that's acceptable to all of you. I have 4 points on the outline. First of all, the basic question, why should we assess Arabic literacy? Second, I'll spend a little bit of time on how the MENA countries are participating in learning assessments, primarily international large-scale assessments, and then talk a little bit about assessments of reading. There will be more further on by the experts after me, in particularly on early grade reading assessments. And then fourth, what are teachers doing in the classroom? How are they using classroom assessment? A short overview on some data on that aspect. And then I will wrap up with a few recommendations from the World Bank perspective. That's the outline. my main messages are structured in a similar way. I think if we all agree that the purpose of the education system is learning, it's not just sitting at the school bench. Children need to learn. If that's our premise and our purpose of the education system, then we absolutely need to assess student learning. And that's what we're doing with student assessment. So student assessment is essential to learning. That's the first message. Second, many countries are participating in an increasing scale at large scale assessments, but we still think that there are room for using the information that comes out of those assessments better. And I'll of course go further into that. Our third message is that while there are more countries that are participating in learning assessments, we still have a number of countries in the region that are not participating, that are not assessing those their students' learning outcomes. And in particular, those are fragile and conflict countries. And I will go through which ones, for example. Fourth message, while we have, and here we go into the early grade reading, we can see that there is a large number of countries that are specifically focusing on early grade reading assessments, but they are often donor-driven, partner-driven, and a little bit smaller in scale. And there is an agenda to institutionalize early grade reading assessment, in particular, perhaps simplify and using screening checks, smaller, nimble learning assessments that can be done on a tablet, for example. So that's the fourth message. Fifth and final message is that teachers are really emphasizing classroom assessments. This is great, but again, we feel that the data indicate that one can use those classroom assessments better to inform parents to use their effectiveness also in assessing teacher effectiveness, for example. So those are the main messages. I'll come back to each of them as we walk through the slides. Then we go into my first content slide. As you can see, the main question here is why assess Arabic literacy? First, we have to note that reading is the most important skill that one can learn in school. So we really, in particularly for the MENA region, that means Arabic. And here, this graph shows how many 10-year-olds can read and comprehend a simple age-appropriate text. This is what is also known as learning poverty. And what we can see is that a significant share in the Middle East and North Africa are learning poor. So we have estimated around 6 out of 10 10-year-old children cannot read and understand an age-appropriate text. And this is pre-COVID. If we were to compare now, our estimation is that a further 10 have become learning poor out of 100. So we are now around 70 out of 100 children that are learning poor. So there's really a need to assess and teach better Arabic literacy in all the countries. And that's what learning assessment is doing. So that's why, so it's critical to assess. Second, what kind of assessment can we look at? And here we have 3 kinds of assessment. The classroom assessments on the right, which is what teachers are doing at a regular basis within the classrooms to make sure that their students have learned and demonstrate the competences that they're supposed to learn during the classes or at the end of a module. So these are our classroom assessments. And then there is the high-stake examinations, TAIQ, Tawhiji, for example, or Tamawiya Ama in Egypt, that measures or that is used to progress students from one level to another. These are useful in that promotion or moving forward in the education system, but they're rarely standard-based, and they cannot be used to say, well, how does the education system or my school performance in 2020 compared to 2021? They're rarely linked and standardized over time. So they serve a purpose, but they don't serve a purpose really to assess performance and learning over time For that, large-scale assessment, be it national or international, are very good. These can be used to assess whether the education system at a school level or at a sub-regional or a national level is really performing well. So we have 3 different kinds of assessment. All are very important, but all serve different purposes. If we then go to the large-scale student assessments, which indicate how important are the ministries of education seeing learning assessments and comparison of learning assessment and in improving education in my country. Here we have countries in the Middle East and North Africa, their participation in international large-scale assessments like PEARLS in green, TIMSS in yellow, grade 4, grade 8 TIMSS orange, and PISA in blue. The overall picture here is that over the last 20-25 years, we can see increasing participation in learning assessments, which is absolutely fantastic. It shows that the region is taking learning and assessment of learning much more serious. Perhaps there's been a little bit of a decline lately, and that is some countries are a little bit afraid of comparing themselves internationally because they're not always doing well. And it does create headlines in national newspapers, which is very good because it puts emphasis on learning. But overall, an increasing participation, excellent. But they are very rich, these surveys and assessment, and we can use the data much more. Beyond just the headlines, they can be used to improve education policy. And we think that's a room for improvement. If we then go a little bit more nuanced into participation, and here is a detailed table of the participation of each of the countries in the Middle East and North Africa, with a symbol for each type of assessment that they have participated in. And the key message to take out here is that we have a number of countries that are really regularly assessing students. And these are the Gulf countries, but also countries like Morocco, that you can see Egypt has been frequently participating, absolutely great. But you can also, on the other hand, see a number of countries, in particular fragile and conflict countries like Libya, like Yemen, like Iraq, where we have 1, perhaps 2 participations over the last 12 years, and a couple of others like Algeria, Djibouti, where there's only 1 or 2 again. So there is still a number of countries that are not regularly assessing student learning at an international comparable or national comparable level. So there's an agenda for a number of countries. It's often something that the World Bank is participating and financing and helping implement. And we will work with those additional countries as well. Now, how does that compare internationally? If you look at the map on your right, you can see green countries are those that have participated in 3 to 4 surveys, while in our region, many countries are orange and red, indicating that they have only done 1 or 2. So MENA is perhaps better than Sub-Saharan Africa, but there is still room for improvement, definitely. Then I would like to move forth to a point on early reading assessments, the ECRAS, which is the particularly tool for assessing literacy. So that can be recognition of letters, it can be sounding out the letters, it can be able to decode a syllable or whole words or whole sentences. An extremely useful tool to assess literacy. And what we can see is that, again, a number of countries in the region have had regular early grade reading assessments. Often, and this is often been driven by donors, in particular USAID have been really doing a great job in supporting countries implementing ECRAS in relation to their financing of education improvement projects. The World Bank have done a few. We supported Saudi Arabia and Tunisia lately with ECRAS. Here, what the agenda is to really institutionalize early grade reading assessments and using them at a school, sub-regional and national level. And to do so, one can simplify a little bit and do these short screening checks, which can often be done on tablets. This is a key agenda on this, but it is overall, there is the ability and the tools to do reading assessment in the early grades. It is really institutionalizing the practice that is our next agenda in this area. If we then move to the final topic on classroom assessments, there is the good news to see that teachers in the classrooms are really using assessments with a major emphasis. Almost 9 out of 10 teachers are saying that they put major emphasis on assessments of students' ongoing work. A little bit fewer are using classroom tests. Something between 6 to 8 out of 10 teachers are regularly putting major emphasis on classroom text. So it is being done at a classroom level, which is great. It's more, again, the use of the classroom test that perhaps could be emphasized. And here we have some numbers from PISA 2018 that shows how our school assessment used. And perhaps there's a room, in our view, to use the assessment more to adapt teaching to student needs, to really improve it moving forward in improving instruction. And also it can be used on assessing teacher effectiveness in particular, and school effectiveness, and inform parents about children's progress. Very critical to get parents in assessing child progress. And then this is my last slide, then I'm done. Thank you for your patience. 4 recommendations that we have. We really need to continue monitoring early grade reading progress. In particularly, there are opportunities with tablets and computers that can standardize and make this much more regular and easy and fast assessments of children's reading. We need to continue the participation in international assessments. This is already happening, but as shown, there's a few countries, in particularly in those conflict countries where we could have some level of assessment taking place. And then we need to build national capacity in each of the countries to undertake the national assessments. It's not enough to just every 4 years have an assessment of 1 grade. Can we do it on a biannual basis with, for example, grade 3, grade 6, or grade 9? One can, and in more topics than just reading and math. So there is really building national systems of assessment. That's a key recommendation. And then lastly, while assessment is absolutely essential to learning, assessment is not the end and the purpose of the education system. It is learning. So we need to not over-assess children and stress them on the assessment. And we should not teach to the test. They need to learn and demonstrate the real competences. That's really the purpose of the education system. With that, I would like to say thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I hope it was informative, what I presented, and hand it back to you, Amal. Thank you very much. Shukran jazeelan.
العفو. Thank you very much, Andreas. شكرا على هذه المعلومات وعلى هذا العرض الذي ركز حقيقة على أهمية.
Thank you for this information and this presentation that focused on the importance of assessments, and you said that it's very critical for education. Perhaps now let's move to you, Dr. Sana Tibi from University of Florida. You also have a presentation that includes a number of important points. We would like to very much to hear you.
الخير أو مساء الخير على
very
الجميع.
much, Miss Amal, and happy Ramadan to all. Today, I hope that I will be able to give you a quick synopsis, just like Mr. Bloom has pointed out. Time is not enough to go in depth into these issues, but I want to talk about the assessment of Arabic literacy. The issue is to assess basic Arabic literacy. Let me move the slide. I'm going to try to remove the images here. What is the assessment and what's the purpose? Simply speaking, it's an attempt to gather information about students to understand who may be in need of additional assistance in learning. This assessment also helps us to prevent any learning difficulties in the future among some students. It also enables us to understand the weaknesses and strengths of students, and more importantly, it helps us to monitor the ability of a student to achieve the learning skills he's supposed to achieve during the learning process. It also helps us to inform ourselves as teachers and to assess the educational program to see if it's fit for all students. It's supposed to be a dynamic process, meaning that it's continuous. So I assess, evaluate, and then teach, and then so forth, so on and so forth. So we will have to benefit from the results as well. Studies have indicated that schools that are most successful are those that adopt protocols for assessment and benefit from the data or the output.
مثال سريع من أمثلة.
A quick example from real samples of third grade students while reading some words. This is according to IRRT. They're simple, difficult to more difficult. I give you a sample of two third grade students, and this study was published in 2019, and it's clear from these samples before you that the student, let us say the student on the right has many mistakes. So if we as teachers did a simple assessment, which is to ask the student to read, we see we can help such a student and we can save him before or her before the situation becomes more complicated. There are many words or terminology used for assessment. There is a fikra that prevention is better than medicine or treatment. So it can happen in the middle of the school year. So this helps us to understand which students are in need of assistance. It may not be 100%. This is not a diagnostic test. A diagnostic test would delve more into the difficulties and strengths of a student. But this is just a simple progress monitoring device and very quick and short, and could tell me which students are really in need of further assistance. So this is being able to sort out which students are in need of help and which are not in need of such help. So monitoring progress, some are based on the curriculum and or included in the curriculum, and there are other forms that is called interim, but the idea is that it's considered a formative assessment because the purpose is to build on these results to teach students. So teachers are supposed to do a lot of progress monitoring during the educational process so that we can help the student with the reading skills and writing skills as soon as possible. So the final assessment here in the Arab world, we have end of school examinations or the high school examinations. This gives me an idea about if whether the student has completed and achieved all the learning skills that he or she was supposed to acquire during a specific time. There are many tools that a teacher can use when assessing or during the school year. As a researcher, and the importance of short dictation on a weekly basis, because dictation gives me a great idea about whether a student is able to identify the letters and the alphabet and form words, etc. So a short quiz of 5 words perhaps on a weekly basis, but a dictation or a quiz, for example, I teach students the Aleph, which is the A. So it's very important for me to test the students' ability. And there's also a checklist that I can go through. There are many forms of quizzes and tests. I would like to also point out that parent-teachers meeting is a form of assessment, and it's very important. And also observation by the teacher in the classroom is also important, to ask questions about the lesson. So there are many forms of informal assessments. What's more important in this short presentation is to understand how special Arabic language is and how we can evaluate Arabic reading skills. So, and to use predictors for the Arabic language. The National Council in the US for Reading indicates, and many researchers as well, and there are many books by Castles and other research by Arab researchers indicate there are indicators that predict whether a student will be able to develop and read, for example, the alphabets, the ability to recognize sound, and they always ask me, what do you mean by this, by RAN, which is the speed at which a student is able to name the alphabet. So, and also the pace or how fast a student can speak. So there's also comprehension, and there's also morphology, because this is one of the most important pillars of reading, development of reading in Arabic. I'll be going further into this, but these 5 factors give us a good sense of the development of reading. So it's all tied to reading, sound readings. So I will be talking about reading well. So the student should be able to read, and so once he has a good inventory of words, he can read them very well. But we have rote studies.
Naming speed with a lot of expectation for having the student at the age of 4 or 5 years old to be fast in naming the pictures and alphabets, which will indicate that perhaps 3 years after that, down the road, that he will become fluent in reading in the future. Language also plays a basic role in the students' knowledge of reading and the development and advancement of reading and comprehending what he reads. So basically speaking, if the student accumulates terms and vocabulary, then this means that he can understand what he is reading. And deriving words also plays a great role in reading and understanding, and especially in the importance of understanding. So if I train the student to understand the importance of reading, spelling of words, and the same root words, and learning the various parts of word patterns in Arabic, this means that the student is advanced in reading and in comprehending reading. What are the dimensions of reading skills to assess? The National Reading Panel and the FCRR at the University of Florida, where I work, and I'm a member of the center, and the Castles and Foreman researchers and many other researchers have concluded that there are 5 elements or main elements that we have to assess. First of all, a phonological awareness and the phonics, which means a good reading by identifying the letter and how it is, the alphabet and how it is pronounced, and the vocabulary, the fluency, and reading comprehension. But we also have to understand that there are various development levels of children. Usually children and the kindergarten stages begin acquiring those skills. So we have to start assessing the phonological awareness and to see what the child knows about the language. And by asking them to read a sentence or short paragraph. In the first grade, we assess more developed or more advanced skills. I will go into a little bit of details if I have time. And we also measure the naming speed. And we focus also on the good reading of the student and the pronunciation or the sounding out of the letters, whether they are in the beginning of the word or the middle of the word and or the end of the word. And in grade 1, is kind of divided into 2 levels. So grade 1, it's in bold because immediately in this stage we have the learning process occurring. So this means that there is a great advancement that we can notice in children's skills in grade 1 when it comes to reading and writing or literacy. Throughout the middle of the year, the last part of the of grade 1, we assess the oral reading fluency of the children and vocabulary, and we also assess the reading and comprehension. Later on, we assess reading fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension, and we assess the child's reading and his ability or their ability, whereby in grade 2 it's different than grade 1. In grade 2, we try to give them multi-syllabic polymorph words and ask them to decode them. So for example, dars and darsi, lesson, my lesson. And in grade 3, we continue to assess reading fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension, but we focus more on these 3 points in grade 3. Researchers have indicated that children's literacy and fluency in grade 1 allows us to predict the level of reading down the road, 3 years down the road. The National Reading Panel and the FCRR and many other researchers done in the West, if we notice that this is from 2000, so they did not focus on morphological awareness. So we have to add to our assessment tools the morphological knowledge and so on. Measuring reading fluency. I have inserted this cartoon over here where a person is asking the animals to climb a tree. All of them are asked to climb the tree. So they all have to undergo the same exercise or test. But in reality, this is a little bit funny because the way we measure fluency in Arabic should differ than the one in English. In English, they use the CWP, correct words per minute method. word, or sometimes in 45 seconds, but this should not be applicable to Arabic. Why? Because Arabic language is very rich in morphology. If we take the word أتتحداني in Arabic, it is not a word, it is are you challenging me in English. So it is a four words, equivalence of one word in Arabic. Same thing for لصديقه in Arabic, which is to his friend. So we have to pay attention to the type and the variety of words in the text. So for example, if I look at the TAOL assessment, the vocabulary, the first 30 words contain on, it, and, if, of, etc. Words composed of 2 letters only. So we have to pay close attention to this. I believe that time is passing by quickly. Amal, please alert me if I am exceeding my time. We are greatly enjoying your presentation. Maybe we have forgotten time because what you are talking about is very important. We hope to continue listening to the rest of the presentation. Please go on. Arabic is a Semitic language. It is not a European language, so it differs than all the other languages of the world. So when we assess Arabic language, we have to take into consideration the characteristics of this language, the beginning and the importance of assessments. For many researchers, the assessment is the first process in the education process. But we have to take into consideration the specificities of Arabic. Arabic is composed of 28 alphabets, 28 or 29. Some consider one of the extra alphabet an alphabet, some don't. We also have to take into consideration the acrophonia. Arabic is different than English. English has 26 alphabets, but 44 sounds. So they have to teach English through the phonic process. We conduct it differently, but in a very important way as well. But what I'm trying to say over here is that one word or one letter is equivalent to a sound. The sound of a letter is in the word. When I say ba and ta, jim, ja, alphabets in Arabic, unlike in English, when, for example, the letter X, I pronounce k, s, x. When I take the letter W, I pronounce it this way, W. So Arabic alphabets completely differ than English alphabets in this context. Arabic language also, the letters, a lot of them are connected to each other, and when they are connected to each other, the shape differs depending on its location, whether it's at the beginning of the word, whether it's in the middle of the word, or at the end of the word. But for example, the alphabet M in Arabic, ma, with, it's at the beginning, and Hamad, the proper noun, the M is in the middle, and this is of course taught from the early grades. And we teach the children that the letters change shape depending on their location in on their position in the word. Arabic language also is defined or known to have a complicated but a transparent way of writing, transparent and opaque way of writing. So there are the diacritics for in Arabic, and diacritics help us to know how to pronounce the words, but sometimes in early stages, diacritics can be difficult for the children and make it a little bit hard for them to learn how to read. However, we have to deeply understand how the comprehension process goes on. For example, the word sana, which means year, is also written as sinaton or sunnaton. the different variations depending on the position of the diacritics or the markings of the word. So without the markings of the word, I have to know how to read this word depending on its location in the sentence, and so on. And more on for morphology. Of course, it is very rich in Arabic, as I mentioned earlier, and we will get to know that later. But also in Arabic is known to be diglossic, which means there's a difference between the spoken and the modern standard Arabic. And over here, we can encounter some difficulties in reading with children. And it starts in the early stages when children are starting to learn to read, but the teacher should, as much as possible, allow the student to properly understand this matter. But diglossia does not mean that we have to neglect the modern standard Arabic. Our language is very rich because of its various qualities or characteristics. I can speak both. I can speak the modern standard Arabic and also the spoken Arabic. The letters that I have in red are certain pronunciations, and there are differences in how these alphabets are pronounced or sounded out. And the pronunciation differs from community to community. For example, the letter jim or jim in Arabic is pronounced jim in some Middle Eastern countries, and or gim, for example, and others. Any researcher in Arabic knows what I'm talking about here with these word structures. But when we teach reading as the mechanics of reading, we have to teach both together. When I teach a student the mechanics of reading, I have to introduce them to simple syllables. For example, ma, the letter ma in Arabic, or la, and here the speaker points out to a typo in the second word. Moving on to the bottom row, lam, an, for example, these do not have the markings, and so on. All of these words, as you can see, the syllables are growing bigger, and also we have rhyming words such as safa, sakha, etc. And then moving on, the words become difficult, for example, and at the end of the kindergarten, we have achieved results. We had 2 students in KG at the end of the school year. They were able to use this word استخدم in Arabic, which means use, and ankabut, which is spider, and mustatil, which is rectangle. This their reading of these 3 words in Arabic meant that these students were very advanced. And these children were able, they had a power to discriminate the children who read these 3 words in red, not because in red color, read them not because they had memorized them from before, but because they were able to clearly distinguish, and they have an advanced level of reading. The alphabets or the letters, and through the Queen Rania Foundation, we have worked on the assessing of letter knowledge. In English, we know there are uppercase and lowercase letters. In Arabic, that does not exist. The letter is or alphabet either comes separate or tied to other words or connected to other words. We have short-sounding words, long-sounding, short-sounding letters, or long-sounding letters. The long-sounding letters are the ones that can be treated as a complete letter, and this is what we teach the children as well. But we have to assess all the various fields of the Arabic. Also, some of the alphabets are easy to pronounce, and the children are able to learn them faster and quicker. However, in this research from 2022 from SSR, we published our findings, which was the following. We hear a lot about diglossic nature and other changes in letters, but we found that Arabic is different than others, and what plays a role in the advancement of the students' knowledge of letter is the letter frequency and not the other changes. Yes, some may not be pleased with this finding, but the highest levels of statistics and studies were done. The letters in yellow are the difficult letters, and those that are developed later on in stages, and they are diglossic. We should not forget also the frequency of these letters as well. This is a graph that is very important. If we want to conclude with something today, I want to conclude with two things, with this diagram or the figure, or and the previous screen, the screen or table. This means that alphabets, when they are separated, do not give full meaning according to children's understanding. As for the difficult letters, where I am pointing here, give me good results, but not necessarily with those who are weak in reading. And I'm talking about 5-year-olds. What about children in intermediate stages, or who have a more advanced level of reading? We should not assess them on their reading of the letters separately, but on their reading of the letters and the various positions in the word and reading of syllables. We have excellent students. What does this mean to us? This means that the students, even those who are 5-year-olds, if they are excellent and they have mastered the reading of letters, we have to assess them in a different way, meaning by reading words. This study was published in 2021 in Reading and Writing magazine. And these results, as you can see very quickly, indicate that there are two axes that are very important regarding the phonological awareness, which indicates that children can read well and have a good naming speed and read fluently. So any assessment that should be done should include these two elements. How do we assess phonological awareness? There has been a myth or a misunderstanding in the Arab world, which says that we have to assess phonological awareness the same we do in English. This is wrong, because there are syllables in Arabic also, which differ than, of course, in English. So in order to show you an example, the beginning of the word, we do not have two successive silent letters at the beginning of the word. Any silent letter in Arabic should be connected to a marked letter. This is how it is in Arabic. So, for example, we cannot ask a child to identify the first or sound out the first letter and eliminate the marked letter. For example, the letter ja, Jamal, if we delete ja, it becomes mal. Mal means money, and Jamal is beauty. The most important researchers have indicated that a company or having these elements put together helps a lot in phonological awareness. And yes, there are many researchers, and I am working at the Florida State University. This is what we have concluded. However, this does not mean that we should eliminate phonological awareness and assessing phonological awareness. I have many examples. For example, the picture of a washing machine, or any of these three pictures here, the word of these pictures, they begin with different letters. For example, lettuce is khas in Arabic. The letter kha, the beginning of the word, is marked with a fatha, khas. There are other examples. For those who are bilingual, can read both and understand what I'm trying to say exactly also. But there are some things that we do not see with assessing phonological awareness. The schools in the West, for example, maybe they do not focus a lot on how some words that are written almost the same, but they are different. For example, sar and sar, both of these words have different beginnings. And this study was published in 2021. We conducted a study of the number of letters, syllables, and morphemes in words, whether there is ligaturing, and the frequency, the orthographic frequency, and the root type frequency, etc. We studied all of these elements, whether the word is a pronoun or an adjective, whether it is concrete or abstract. We found that the most important element that plays a role in the advancement of literacy skills is not the number of letters or syllables, but the number of morphemes. For example, if we take the word shafa, it's 2. Mustashfa, hospital, is 3. Al-mustashfayat, the hospitals, so it goes, increases in size. So for example, the word تتحداني, you defy me. صديقته, صديقتهم. So how many morphemes do we have in these words? And this will indicate the difficulty or the ease of the words. And the child's knowledge or morphological awareness over here also plays a big role in the strength of the child's reading level. And this indicates that in a very simple way, when we take into consideration morphological awareness in this equation, after all these changes, including naming speed, phonological awareness, dictation, memory, intelligence, after all these changes, even the language, we found that morphemes play an important role in each of these reading skills, in comprehension, and text reading fluency, and word reading fluency, and pseudo word reading, and word reading. This is the biggest indicator to the importance of morphemes and enriching the words and where it plays an important role in the assessing tool. So we have to teach others about the specificities of the language in order to benefit the others. There were many or a few researches done in 2019 and 2021. This is the structural equation modeling that indicates that the root awareness and the roots words of the same root play a big role in reading and literacy skills. For example, the word laiba, plays, it can change into laiba is the root word, so it can also change into malab, playground, and so on, depending on the comprehension level or reading level. So there is an important statistic that talked about the importance of root awareness and assessing root awareness, and this was published in 2019 in applied linguistics. There are many other activities whereby we color the root word. For example, I can tell the child a word, and the child will color using various colors, or the word color, يلون, تلونان, you two color, هو يلون, he colors. These are one of the activities. For example, another activity with the word wash, غسل, غسالة, washing machine, and so on. There are other activities when it comes to morphological relation judgment. Bint, girl, banat, girls, nabat, plants. No. So This is where lies the importance of morphological knowledge and root awareness, and so on. And the study was published in 2017, 2019 by Dr. Abdallah Shaqiri in 2018, and the book is available in Arabic as well. There is a strong tie between spelling and reading. If we take into consideration these three boxes in English, first of all, let's begin with the green one. There we can see that there's a continuity in the advancement of spelling and the power in reading or strength in reading and spelling words. What about this box here in the middle? Why do we have, okay, we have students there. This axis is about reading pseudo words or spelling pseudo words. Doctor, I do not want to interrupt, but you still have 2 more minutes. If you can summarize the rest, it's important for us to hear the conclusion of your presentation and give the chance to other speakers. Thank you. These are individual differences. These are the children who read in the green box, who know how to spell each word. And the ones in the middle box they do have an advanced level of reading, but after 2 years, they will start to lag in reading. And this diagram also shows us the various speeds of our naming speeds, and those students who are good in naming speed, who are faster than others, so those who are slower and others. I believe that this is the final slide. What I want to stress on is that we should have a noble, high objective or goal when it comes to assessment and when it comes to teaching children, and the types of tools that we use that should be built on good scientific qualities or characteristics, that should be accurate, should be comprehensive of content, and so on. And of course, assessment is very important to continue for children. And thank you very much. And I apologize if I took too long. On the contrary, we thank you, Dr. Sana Taibi. In fact, this is one of the most important and detailed reports that we enjoyed greatly, because it relied on a lot of scientific evidence and studies pertaining to the reading skills, literacy skills, and you talked about the specificities of Arabic and how it differs than English language, and what should be done in order to teach the students based on morphological awareness, phonological awareness, etc. Thank you very much for your presentation today. And thank you for sharing it with us, with the teachers and policy developers in the Arab world. And I hope that this report will be available. I will move on to our other 2 guests. We'll begin with Dr. Adha Jibril, who is the director of the Department of Applied Linguistics and director of teaching of English to speakers of other languages program at the American University in Cairo. We would like to benefit from your experience, since you have participated in a series of trainings to train teachers on assessment of assessment to support the practices of teaching practices. If you can tell us your most prominent experiences when it comes to assessing and assessments and making them more effective. Thank you, Amal. At the outset, please let me know how much time I have. I believe we, because the previous presentation was very detailed, I believe that we still have a half an hour left, divided between you, the other guest, and other questions. So I think I will give you have 7 minutes. Yes, that is enough. I will try my best. Thank you very much, Amal. And at the outset, I would like to express my gratitude to the Queen Rania Foundation and the World Bank Group for this invitation to participate. I highly appreciate the efforts made for highlighting the importance of assessment, because as we know and as we heard from Dr. Sana, assessment is highly important. And I will take two words that she concluded her presentation with when she said that we use assessment to guide and inform us in the training and the teaching process. I will try to focus on these issues when it comes to training teachers. As we know, the decisions taken in teaching, of course, yes, they rely on assessment, and we know that there's an urgent need to complement these assessments and do a teacher's assessment literacy. And in fact, I'm very satisfied with this term, teacher's assessment. The assessments, when we talk about them, it is very difficult to talk about the efficiency of assessment. And as we heard from Sana and Dr. Blom, that the purpose or main objective of assessment is to measure the outcomes of teaching in schools. But there is also a function that we are focusing on, which is to use assessment to improve the teaching process. And through my discussion, or through my response, I will try to shed light on how teacher training programs deal with the two functions. The first function, beginning with accountability, and the other one is using assessment for learning. Let
us move to programs for the preparation of teachers. We have two types of programs for preparing teachers before they enter into service. And the other type is while they're teaching. Before they start teaching, and I will try to be very brief, these programs, we find some context approved in the curriculum and its assessment for their to evaluate content in Arabic language, physics, and sciences. This model is economic to some extent, but unfortunately, this model denies Arabic language teachers from focusing on evaluation skills of Arabic that Dr. Sana mentioned, tied to the also specificity of the language. I've taken a quick look on these evaluation programs. Some programs talk about the specificity of the Arabic language, that it requires different assessments, but most of these programs are relatively little. They're not common, and also, especially with respect to preparing teachers for teaching. So the evaluation part is being talked about. We talk about the curriculum being used in teaching, but oftentimes schools do not carry out any type of evaluations. Another issue I would like to raise is tied to the content and the preparation of teachers before they enter into teaching. Most programs focus in a personally way on the results of examinations. But the major problem here is, so they're tied to the idea of learning-oriented assessments. And Dr. Sana has also spoken about this in her discussion of the importance of teaching. And Mr. Andreas has also talked about it when he talked about assessment inside the classroom. I'm very interested in this particular issue because we cannot, we can call this a conflict between the requirements of examinations and the learning activities. Because in schools, this is a very important problem. Educational policy pays a lot of attention to examinations. And this is the problem because we have teachers who focus on grades, but evaluation and assessment that focus on the learning process, this is not present, and it may take a long period of time. And therefore, the focus is always on assessment on learning, not assessment for learning. For that reason, I would hope that we can focus more on how to prepare teachers in a school context where we can have a greater harmony between the goals of learning. And I will go back to this. I'm going to be brief on this issue. And thank you.
إعداد المعلم أثناء الخدمة.
Teacher preparation programs while they're teaching pays a lot of attention to the role of beliefs in assessment. And I hope, I don't know if there's time to talk about this too, about the beliefs on teachers. But as we know, any guide in which there is no harmony between examinations and other curricular activities would lead to lack of success. Because generally we have to have the right environment for education and for learning. And many of these programs do not try to address the conflict between examinations and learning. There's another important issue, which is the long-term strategic planning for the preparation of teachers. As we know, many teachers do not undergo such programs, and because they're usually tied to funding or from a certain party or a vision of a certain person at a ministry. There is one last thing I would like to talk about. We talk always about teacher assessment literacy. And there's another issue that doesn't take enough attention, which is the development of other assessment skills. We're talking about school principals, policymakers in the educational field, even parents, because their understanding of assessment would make the teaching easier. The last issue, I know I'm out of time, is the issue of enablement. And when we talk about this issue, we have to to see these assessment tools as a form of enabling teachers, because they are to the skills of teachers themselves. It takes effort on the part of teachers, and especially for Arabic language teachers, they have to be fit. And if the tools are not appropriate for them, the teacher would dismiss them. Because as they say in English, teachers are more interested in putting food on the table. So after that, I would like to talk, if we have time, I would like to talk about beliefs and teachers' belief and the improvement of enablement. I'm afraid we're out of time and maybe we won't be able to discuss this issue. For the teacher to believe about the importance of evaluation
and the assessment process, but also the more
and
effective
also
institutions, the educational institutions, they should
that are more
submit to the assessment. I want to give the
now I
chance
give the
to
word
our
to
guest,
our guest,
Dr. Jane Courtney, and I promise you, if we still have enough time, I will get back to you, sir. Dr. Jane, you have worked in some important initiatives in Jordan that help defining the children who need extra support in learning to read, since not all the children have the same capabilities to learn, and we all know that the schools in the Arab world and around the world were closed because of the pandemic. But if you can tell us more about these initiatives that you focused on in this period, and how was assessment used to target instructional programs?
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this session. It's been very interesting, and some of what I say now will resonate with the comments of the previous speakers and apply what they've been talking about to some of the practice. UNICEF have been working very closely with the Ministry of Education in Jordan in partnership to look at how we can find out more what's happened due to COVID, but also to dig into the detail of children's reading. So we've done two initiatives. The first one has been a national diagnostic assessment. It's taken a period of 5 months to develop, and it was focused on Arabic and mathematics for children in grades 4 to 11. For each grade group, it went back 2 grade groups to try and understand what children could know and do, as they've not lost over a year and a half of teaching. And the second piece of work I want to talk to you about is a reading recovery program where assessment has been built right into it. Before we dig into the details of the program, just to pick up on some of the things people have said and to think about the background of this. I'd like us to think about what an ideal design of an assessment system should be, in that it should map what we know about how children learn to read into an assessment system. And to do that, the assessment system should enable us to know what children know, but also what teachers need to know about what children need to learn next, having done the assessment. So globally, there's been research for a good 100 years into how people learn language. And then, of course, there's also the sorts of things Dr. Tibi has been talking about when she mentioned specific language and how children learn Arabic. And maybe that's an area that we still need to develop. We know languages are constructed differently, and therefore how children learn to read varies from language to language. And assessment tools should also reflect that. And sometimes we found that international approaches, although we want them to translate from one country to another, don't do it necessarily as well as we want it to do. Okay, so thinking of assessment then, we must be able to map assessment onto how children actually learn to read. We want to use that assessment to progress children's reading development. We can't just focus on a tiny bit of reading. We need to think about reading outside the school. It's contextual, and we know that attitudes towards reading, the types of books children have access to, and parental engagement will also affect how well a child learns to read. We want to find out what children do, and that means that we often require finely grained texts. We don't want an assessment that just tells us what they can't do and what they don't know. On a wider thing, something like a national diagnostic assessment that we've been talking about should be informative in terms of curriculum development, in terms of pedagogy and teacher training that Professor Jibril has touched on, and what that might look like in Arabic, where we've had fairly formal approaches across the Middle East. Then we get on to the point as how can assessment tackle particular learning difficulties, and Dr. Tibi also talked about provide indicators. And then the last point we need to make is how is it practical? And Mr. Bloom tackled the idea of quick assessments and sampling and screening as a way to move assessment forward. So if we then go quickly into the content, I'm going to give you a couple of examples that I think are very crucial to our beliefs in how children learn to read and assessment. One has been the ongoing reading wars that I'm sure people are aware of, which is largely phonics versus real books, and two ends of an spectrum where we've got to join it together. And the other is the context of reading, which I've also touched upon. It's a lot more than just developing decoding skills. We haven't talked much about vocabulary, but vocabulary is linked to cognitive development and the future success for children, but is less likely to be assessed. Now we come on to COVID. The very things in COVID about language development and oral language development and interaction is the very thing children have lost, as well as losing formal teaching, a lack of regular practice. And we know that many students, according to the statistics we've seen from Mr. Bloom, were way behind before COVID started. So we've got two things here. We want children to be able to decode. We know that is a predictor of how successful they will be up to about grade level 2. But beyond that, it's actually making meaning that tends to be the predictor for future literacy achievement. So we somehow need to bring all this together. So I'm going to just talk to you very briefly now about the reading recovery program that we've set up. It does start with screening. We can't support every child, but we can put in place a screening assessment that allows us to look at those children who can read and those children who are struggling. And we only last week were working on screening in the refugee camps with grade 6 children. And out of 217 boys who went for a screening at a grade 3 level, so the idea was that they should have been able to read the text and answer some simple comprehension skills, we found that 48% of them were unable to read the text or were very poor at reading the text. So they're approximately 4 years behind. A further 13% of them could decode the text. We might call a phrase barking at print, but were actually unable to do the comprehension. And this is the issue about making meaning, as well as the phenomenological awareness that children need. For the actual assessment, we've used exactly what Mr. Bloom suggested, which is tablets, with thanks to a company called Diglossier, who've designed a reading assessment. We've been able to work very closely with them and put up bespoke tests that suit Jordan. So they're based on Jordan sight words, Jordan expected reading outcomes, vocabulary that you'd expect to find in the Jordan textbooks. So that's what we're using as sampling. And from the sampling, we will now do more of a diagnostic assessment with those children who need reading recovery. Our reading recovery program also is based on assessment at regular intervals. So it works on a modular basis. Children go in at the right level after the diagnostic assessment. They work intensively for 4 weeks on learning Arabic and practicing their reading. And then after that period, they're assessed, which then moves them on. If they can stay working at the accelerated speed, they continue. And if they are unable to work at that speed, they move into a gradual track. So what we're doing is we're using assessment for initial screening, we're using it for diagnosis, and then we're using it as a progressive process to take us through. So it's very early days on the reading recovery. Backed up with that, we're hopeful that we will have results from the National Diagnostic Assessment, which will give some indication into which areas of Arabic children are really struggling with. Is the curriculum in the right order? Is it at the right level for the right grade? And that's the information we hope to have for the Ministry of Education as we go forward, so that we're going in at two directions. We're looking at, okay, what should curriculum be? What should pedagogy be? What should teacher training be, alongside what are we learning from working with individual children? Reading assessment is notoriously difficult. If you want to know how a child reads, you have to listen to them read. If you've got a class of 60 and you've got to do that a few times a term, it becomes absolutely impossible. So we have to, as Mr. Bloom said, design more effective methods, but we don't want to lose the very detailed work we need to do in Arabic, particularly around things like assessing through learning portfolios, regular snapshots of children's progress that informs us more about how children are learning Arabic. And I'll leave it at that because I know that we're very tight this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Jane Courtney. شكرا جزيلا لك على
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jane Courtney. Perhaps with the few minutes left, we will get back to you, Professor Ata, with when you said you wanted to talk about the beliefs, Dr. Ata, if you can explain to us about the beliefs of teachers or their impressions or perspectives of teachers of the assessments here in the region, and how we can help them to change these perspectives so that assessing Arabic language, Arabic becomes more effective and more beneficial. With these last few minutes left given to you, I will try as much as possible. Thank you. Basically, we cannot talk about any practice regardless of the historical and cultural richness of the language. And within this context, we can see that it is tied to the assessment process in general. And I will give you a few examples. For example, the term تقويم. تقويم means evaluation in English. But if we look at the word in Arabic, it is derived from the word قوّم. قوّم means valued or evaluated, yes. And this means that you are assessing something that has a problem and needs to be corrected. Let us take also تصحيح الاختبار, which translates into grading or scoring. This means that something needs to be corrected. Even if we take the term درجات, which means scores, it creates a lot of competition between the students because I am very impressed also with the term grades that is used by some teachers in the Arab world, and the perspectives or the beliefs. Yes, we do have a negative perspective tied to tests in the Arabic culture. When we talk about teachers in general, and we know that they are practicing these assessment activities, they're doing the assessment from their perspective. Sometimes they see that an assessment is a process to punish the child in one way or another. Unfortunately, this is the case, but I am not generalizing all the teachers, but I'm talking about something that is very common that we know about tests in the Arabic world. And this takes us to accountability that I mentioned at the beginning. Even after the training of teachers, we see that teachers at the end resort to the final assessment. The final assessment, we always as Dr. Jane talked about, that there are some difficulties with dealing, for example, the large number of students, as we heard from others, or difficulty in data management. But these beliefs and perspectives impact to a great extent the how and why we do an assessment in schools. And thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ada Jibril. And we hope that all this volume of information and recommendations will be taken into consideration in order to reach what Dr. Sana expressed, that a successful assessment begins with a successful teaching. Thank you to all the speakers in today's webinar and for all your efforts. We will stop here. We will conclude here. We will have our 5th webinar conducted by the World Bank with Queen Rania Foundation on the 31st of May. And it is titled Supporting Struggling Readers and Raising Boys Literacy. Thank you very much for attending. I was very pleased to manage to run this webinar, and thank you very much.